Hi everybody, it's Joe Chaffee on this Monday, the 24th of September, 2 minutes after 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Welcome everybody to tonight's live stream, and we've got a lot of things going on. None of them actually very big, but sometimes it's the smaller events that you have to pay a little bit of attention to, and sometimes they can evolve into something major, and we'll see how this all plays out in time. Just kind of looking at this system that is off the southeast coast of the United States, because we are seeing blossoming a bit of some thunderstorms this afternoon, but things still remain a bit disorganized, so we'll be talking about that. We have what was a very raw, cool day across the Northeast. It was nice up in northern New England, for example, but not so nice when you go further south. With cloud cover as a warm front is setting up, and this is going to start the process of taking us back into tropical air. It's going to lead into maybe some severe weather here on Wednesday. And the overall pattern, I was just kind of looking at it through it, really looks like we're going to get into a pattern where things are going to start moving along on a fairly regular basis with these weather fronts. What we get behind them and ahead of them remains to be seen. The tropics, we lost Kirk today, which shows no evidence of a circulation. So they downgraded it this morning. They downgraded from a tropical storm to a tropical depression, and then midday they downgraded it to a tropical wave, and that's where it is at the moment. Leslie is out in the central Atlantic, subtropical storm, kind of enveloped in this large upper low that's out there, and it's likely to be absorbed. It's a kind of complex scenario that's developing out. It's going to be a very large, it appears to be a large extratropical storm that's going to develop in the next 24 to 48 hours. That's going to absorb Leslie, and then we're going to probably see it morph into something going through the next 10 days. Just going to mill around out there for a while. So, you know, this is an interesting time of year because you're kind of at cross currents. You've got the atmosphere starting to cool off significantly to the north, so you're seeing the beginnings of cooler Canadian air and eventually colder Canadian air coming down. You still have the tropics, though, working pretty hard to produce a few more tropical storms as the season heads up into the month of October. Here's the system that's off the southeast coast, and as I said, during the day today, we've seen a marked increase in thunderstorm activity, but it still remains fairly disorganized. It's a little hard to see it on this particular loop, but it seemed to me like there were actually at least two centers of low pressure that I could see, and there might be even a third in there somewhere. So it really is not a well-organized system at all. I think when you look at the standpoint of what the upper air winds are telling you, conditions are not crazy favorable. They are somewhat conducive that this thing could organize a bit, but it literally has another 24 hours before it's going to start to encounter conditions that are going to be less favorable, and particularly because it's going to encounter this frontal system, this warm front, cold front combination that's coming into the eastern part of the United States over the next couple of days. So that is going to probably hinder development. The other thing that might happen is that if you do wind up with an identifiable low that comes out of here, I think the most likely track would be along or just east of the immediate Carolina coast and the Outer Banks. I don't think this is going to have much impact with respect to rain inland. If it does skim the coast, it'll be a quick shot of rain, and that will be it. In the meantime, we'll show you what we got with respect to watches and warnings up. We do have a small area from covering central Tennessee, a good chunk of Kentucky except the extreme east and the extreme west, and into parts of northwestern West Virginia and southeastern Ohio, where we have flood watches up. And there has been some flooding today with respect to some of the rain that has fallen in that particular area. Severe weather is not a big issue tonight. While we do have rain and some heavier thunderstorms, they're not of the severe variety. For the most part, there's a small box. I don't know how they got this, but they drew this. They have this boxed area. You're always having these weird circles that are being drawn, or you know, these amorphous shapes. Here we have what looks like a rectangle covering southeastern Wyoming, westernmost Nebraska, and a teeny tiny portion there in northern Colorado for a marginal risk of severe weather. It's like, you know, it's possible that one or two of the storms that you see down in the Gulf states might get fairly strong. But overall, though, it's a pretty quiet, severe weather day. We are getting into some rain here, and that is going to be front and center. The rain area on the radar, we're going to do this first. We're going to come back to the tropics later, because I think right now those seem to be secondary. So I hope those of you, I did see one mention on the chat there about enjoying the wonderful cool weather. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to, you know what, give me half a second here. Let me just do this. This makes it a little easier. I can pop the chat board out and lay it on the side when it's working. JS Sweetie, I thought it was you. Yes, definitely much better from the standpoint of the temperatures today. No doubt about it. I was quite pleased. This is my favorite time of year. Okay, there's the radar, pretty loaded with rain from central and western Pennsylvania, covering parts of West Virginia. Not all of that rain, by the way, is heavy at the moment. You can see some patches of heavier rain in southeastern Ohio and down into Kentucky and parts of Tennessee, where I showed you earlier with respect to the radar that there were some, some thunderstorms there. Why does it keep jumping to that? And here's the southern end of that. It looks like there is some kind of a line here that we can see in parts of central Alabama moving northward. So you've got this tropical moisture that's pushing up to the north, and this is all getting involved with this frontal system that is going to be impacting the east coast of the United States. Okay, just a quick hello to everybody on here collectively. We've got a nice little crowd tonight, which is always good. So why don't we take a look at where weather models are going. We've got the whole new run of the GFS. And in the east, weather maps, by the way, is always courtesy of tropicaltidbits.com. A great website. If you haven't used it, you should check it out. First off, with respect to the system in the southeast coast, even though we're seeing this expanding area of thunderstorms, we are still not seeing any of the global models or even the short-range models doing much with it. There's a weak low-pressure center here. By tomorrow morning, it's at about 31.6 and 76.7. And if you look at the outline of the precip, there is some shower activity around it, but we don't have a particular, the model at least is not doing much in terms of showing a concentrated area of showers and storms. As we go into the afternoon, there's an arc of heavier rain, and then you see that little, it looks like almost a stick there of yellow and red on the outer banks of North Carolina. I think that really is the extent of the rainfall that you're going to get out of this, since much of the activity may wind up being offshore into the east. Meanwhile, the rain area advances into Philadelphia, New York City overnight, and into Tuesday, and there will be some heavy rain with this as the warm front pushes northward, and the gradient's going to be a little bit tight overnight, so it might be a bit breezy right along the coast. You can see the big high there to the north and lower pressures to the south, and a large change in pressure over a small, over the relatively short distance defines the pressure gradient. So it's fairly tight. It's not overly tight, but it's tight enough to kick the winds around a little bit. The warm front's going to go by. This warm front's going to move all the way up into northern New England. So we're going to transition over into a bad hair, warm tropical day on Wednesday, and here comes the next cold front, and there's a decent push behind this front of cool air. You've got a reasonably strong shortwave trough swinging across the Great Lakes, and I think it's going to trigger some severe weather or potential for some severe weather across the Northeast and parts of the Mid-Atlantic Wednesday evening as the front goes by. The Storm Prediction Center had this area in a slight risk yesterday on their Day 4 forecast. So when they see it 4 days in advance, it's not usual for them to do that, to have such an aggressive forecast that far out. So I wouldn't at all be surprised to see them go to a moderate, an enhanced risk for some areas. The conditions aloft are at least unstable enough. They're not ideal, but you do have relatively unstable conditions so that some of these thunderstorms could prove to be strong. The front goes by, and of course, the scenario that follows, at least it has been the case over the last 6 weeks or so, or longer, is that the fronts have to stall out across the mid-Atlantic states, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen this time. There's going to be a brief slowing, and then it's just kind of falls apart. High pressure builds in for the end of the week. You do have some moisture that sort of lingers down in parts of the South Atlantic states and even up into western North Carolina and a small area of West Virginia, but they don't look to be big rains here. More along the lines of stuff that pops up in the relatively unstable air. The high moves out, and then you have the next warm front, cold front sets up to the north. So as we go into early next week, we'll probably get a push of warm air briefly before another front comes through on Wednesday and keeps on moving. And then the next one comes through at the end of next week and keeps on moving. And behind this is at day 10 and 11, we're seeing a rather significant shot of cold air. I'll call this cold air this is Friday, October 5th, coming into the Great Lakes and Plains and even into the Northeast. Now, do we believe it? Well, again, this is going to hinge on the idea that the GFS is right on the amplitude of the trough that it's swinging around. And as we know, the GFS has been notoriously guilty of over-amplifying these things. We were supposed to have a big trough and cool air for this coming weekend. Guess what? Not happening. And once again, you can see this is a really amped up, amplified trough in the east. The only thing I would say is a lot of this might hinge on the typhoon in the West Pacific that is going over Japan and moving northeastward from there. I haven't had a chance to get much information on it, but if that recurves, it may wind up energizing a low eventually in the Aleutians here, which wants to make it pop up a ridge along the west coast and up the Rockies and up the west coast, which would dive a deep trough in the east and a big ridge up in the North Atlantic. So a lot going on. Then of course that lifts out, and then we see maybe another arm coming down. So kind of an interesting pattern to me that is shaping up going forward. But we didn't start from the beginning. Here's the short wave. Now we're coming into tonight, and here's the short wave. You can see the trough here for Wednesday out across the Midwest. It is strong there. It lifts, the body of it lifts up more to our north, but there's enough of a push at least to get the drier air in here. And then you get another short wave that drops into the plains and Great Lakes, and then that kind of flattens out somewhat. You still have evidence, by the way, of a ridge in the southeast and into the eastern Gulf of Mexico. What may be an extratropical storm at this point, sitting in the middle of the Atlantic and a ridge on the other side of it. That storm is going to play a role, by the way, in the strength of the ridges that we're seeing. So it's going to be important to watch it from that respect. The GFS wants to eventually, it tries to hold on to that ridge across the Gulf states, but eventually it does flatten it out and shift it westward, and it's doing it now. We saw it at the day 14, 15, 16 time frame yesterday. Now we're seeing it in the 11, 12, 13 time frame. So it's still kind of holding on to it, although it may have changed it a little bit, but it still has the same general idea. It's gonna be fun to watch. I kind of like this time of year, if only because I get to watch the upper air pattern transition and evolve over the next couple of months. So until we get to December, and watching as I like to always refer to them as chess pieces, and watching these chess pieces moving around in the longer term. Very interesting, and also you learn a lot, and you watch how these blocks form. This actually, for the beginning of October, is a pretty amped up looking upper air across Canada and across the Pacific. I don't seem to remember it being this way in the last couple of years, at least at this stage of where we are in the early part of the fall. Maybe this is a hint that this fall is going to be much different than the last several, where summers, at least in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states, wound up getting extended well into the month of October. Maybe this year will be the year where as folks have told me they would really like to see a normal fall for a change, maybe this year is the year that it happens. Now, we're going to switch over to the tropics. And actually, before we do that, let me just do a really fast, shameless self-promotion, if you guys don't mind. I have been talking about my platform on Patreon. It is a combination of what I'm doing with videos and everything else. That's the Joe and Joe show, which is coming up later. Oh well, I had the logo up here earlier. I don't know what I did with it, but the bottom line is I've got the platform on Patreon. It's a subscription platform, and what it does is you'll be with other weather people. We'll be talking. Of course, you'll get all my website posts along with others that are not going to be on the website. You get to message me whenever you like, and I will respond in a timely manner with whatever questions or comments you might have. Also, I've been doing at least once a day a video in the morning that is just exclusive for Patreon members. So if it works for you, it's just $2 a month. I'm putting the link right now up in the chat, and thank you for those of you who have joined our little community. It's troll free, flat earther free, HARP free, geoengineering free, weather controlling free. It's all good. So it's only, like I said, it starts at $2 a month, and I also have an app that's going to be coming out soon. So take a look at it, and I appreciate that greatly. Thank you, Howard. Good to see you here. Chris, Alley, good to see you too. Steve Addy, if the GFS is overdoing the ridges, is it because the model assumes the jet stream will waver more than it will be? I think it may be a number of things, and one of the things it might have to do with is the fact that it might be overdone with these tropical systems. The GFS has been really trying to wrap up that system that is Leslie, for example, whether it be tropical, subtropical, or non-tropical. It does drop it to a crazy pressure, and as a result, you are perhaps amplifying ridges on the Atlantic side and on both sides of the Atlantic, and there might be equal things going on, similar things going on the Pacific side, although I honestly don't pay close attention to what goes on in the Central and West Pacific. I wonder whether the GFS maybe was overdoing the pressures. Perhaps that was amping up ridges and troughs to some degree. There's certainly something in the model in the last number of weeks where we've seen this happen, and it gets like this from time to time, by the way. Sometimes it does overdo it, sometimes it underdoes it, but right now we seem to be in a stretch where it wants to overdo these things. Let's go back to the system now off the southeast coast of the United States. I have a loop that goes back from earlier today, and you can watch the blossoming of these thunderstorms. If you look carefully, though, on the southern end of the cloud cover, you can pick out a little bit of turning in a couple of places. So I think there's two weak low pressure centers here. If that's where the lowest pressures are, there's very little weather on the south side. So most of it is north and northeast of the center. And if this is the satellite signature we're going to hold on to, this is why, even if it does develop, if most of the convection with this winds up being north and northeast of any kind of weak low center, that means that the bulk of any rain is going to be from the outer banks of North Carolina and out east into the Atlantic, and not having, excuse me, I had to take a quick drink, not having any impact on the land areas in the Carolinas. At least that's the way, that's the way I'm seeing this. And with regards to what the models are doing, we can look at, under current storms, we can look at the system. Oh, he has, look at this, wow. Trami is 140 knots, 916 millibars. So it's a Cat 5 here that's heading for Japan. I'm going to come back to that, so hang on a second. So here's the look for of the hurricane tracking models for the system that we just showed you, and the cluster of those models takes it offshore and to the northeast. You've got a few of them that are further to the west, but the vast majority of them are hooking it up and turning it to the northeast. It's kind of following what the European is doing holding on to an identifiable low as it moves northeastward. The GFS kind of absorbs it with everything that's going on in the east with the frontal system. Either way, I don't think it has much impact on our weather. Okay, let's do a quick ad lib here. I want to look at this with Trami. I'm guessing that's how you pronounced it. So it's at 19.6 north, 129.1 east. Top winds 140 knots. So that's, I think, 165 miles an hour. A minimum central pressure of 916 millibars. So this is every bit a Category 5 hurricane. The GFS ensembles, okay, this moves it right over Japan. And in fact, it does weaken it. Well, the mean pressure is 937, so I don't, it has it at 952. If you use the average pressure there off the ensembles, why don't we take a look at what the GFS does specifically with this? But the track here, again, over all of Japan, and then up to clip South Korea, and then eventually this is all going to wind up getting absorbed by a big low up toward northeastern Asia, and that eventually, I think, winds up in the Gulf of Alaska. So let's go to the Pacific. I really want to see what it does with this. Let's use the wide. Well, you know what? We can use East Asia because we can see Japan on this, and I mean, it's got a 905 pressure here on the GFS, which is fairly close to what it is, and it holds on to this, meanders it. I mean, look, I don't know how real this is. By the way, there's another typhoon here, if that's right, on in 5 days to the southeast of Trami. I honestly don't look at this stuff on a regular basis out here, so I can't tell you how the models have handled this or not. If that Category 5 pressure heading into Japan like this is correct, because if it is, this is a big, huge problem. But it really just holds on to it as it moves northeastward, and now we can go wider. And hang on, let's get that Pacific view. Where'd it go? That North Atlantic, North Pacific. There we go. So we can watch it on this map. So I'm going to use the, because they don't really match up too well. No, I want the normal anomalies, too much less blue. Okay, so here we have, it's right on the left. So you've got Trami moving over Japan, clipping Korea, and then you see how it eventually gets all wrapped up in this big storm in the Gulf of Alaska. The typhoon is basically going to energize this low, it's not in the Gulf of Alaska, but over the Aleutians, and that's going to amp up a ridge in the Pacific, which is why the model drives a deep trough like it does in the eastern part of the United States in the long range around days 11 and 12. So that typhoon is going to be very, very important to the longer term outlook. And the next one, by the way, kind of gets involved, kind of gets picked up with it too. So it sort of re-energizes it and keeps it there in the long, long haul. So very interesting, very interesting situation developing, and you can see the impact that the weather has, by the way, with what's going on in the Western Pacific, and how that eventually can lead to impacting the weather downstream in the United States. Again, by energizing this big upper low over the Aleutians, which helps to push up that ridge in the west and drive the trough in the east. As far as whatever's going to be with respect to what is or isn't Leslie, let's look at that now and see what the GFS has to tell us. Hey, Joseph Mayano, thank you so much for hitting Super Chat. Really, really appreciate it greatly. Thank you. And you're looking good for Thursday for your wedding. So congratulations on that. And yes, JS Sweetie, I do mean AARP free and not necessarily just HARP free. I'm sorry, folks. Covering all these different bases and going in all different directions and just trying to keep my thoughts in place can be a bit of a challenge. So if I lose it a little bit every once in a while, please forgive me. So here's the system that is or isn't Leslie as it gets swallowed up by another non-tropical system in the next 48 hours, which may or may not become tropical, which may or may not be correct with that 944 pressure on the GFS. I don't know if it's right. And you'll notice it's basically out there for the next 2 weeks and moves in what looks like a small square of about 500 miles at most in either direction. And I might be stretching it at 500 miles. Meanwhile, the remnants of Kirk are just a tropical wave, and we don't really see too much happening. The GFS is trying to do something around the first weekend of October in the Caribbean, which it eventually wants to lift northeastward. I had earlier thought that maybe around the beginning of the month something might come out of there, but it appears that most of the action is shifting more to the Pacific side, at least initially. Maybe it might take another week or so to get there. I don't know. It's been doing this for many, many runs now for the better part of the last 2 weeks, and it just keeps pushing it back, pushing it back, pushing it back. So I think the best way to kind of handle it is you're going to have to prove it to me. So it can keep on showing this every day. We're not going to really pay it serious attention to, we're not going to pay any serious attention to it until we get it to start to come inside the, say, day 6 or 7 time frame. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting here and wasting our time over it. Day in and day out. You can't expend energy on something that far out into the long range. So I'm going to come to the chat board now. I found my little Patreon icon. Okay, Johnny Quest, with all the tropical activity in the Eastern Pacific, will all that upwelling of cold water decrease the chance of an El Nino event? Well, you know, it's the warming of the water if it goes above normal. If there's an El Nino developing that's increasing the activity, I mean, there is kind of a feedback loop that could occur. The upwelling occurs more further north than down in the region where the El Nino is more significant, which is basically between the equator and about 10 to 15 north. So I don't think you're going to see significant upwelling, and we don't know. I mean, we have an El Nino. I think we still have this El Nino watch up, but we don't have an El Nino underway, and there seems to be, we've seen the concentration of the above average temperatures out in the Pacific from the last time I looked a couple of weeks ago. It was more central and west based, which those who follow it have said that that's where if you see it, it's a central or west based El Nino. It's actually it actually can lead to a cold and stormier winter in the eastern part of the United States. But I want to really strongly emphasize it's one of many, many pieces, okay, of a very, very intricate puzzle. And there's no one magic bullet in all of this that you can point to and say, okay, this indicator says X, therefore the outcome is going to be A, B, and C. And it's like this every single time. I wish it worked that way. It would make life a lot easier, but it doesn't. We're constantly trying to find clues all over the place. And one of the clues that we'll look at in October, of course, is the Siberian snow cover growth. I sent an email, by the way, to the NOAA site that has the snow cover website to let them know. Maybe I'm the only one that's going there, or maybe I'm the only one that took the time to send them out an email. But I did see something on there saying that if something on here isn't working, please email us and let us know. So I'm thinking that no one's emailed them. So they got an email today. So hopefully they'll fix it. Do I think it's going to be a snowy winter on the East Coast? Asked Beg McInnes. Well, those of you who know me know that I am not big on the long-range stuff. I can't wrap my head around it. But in terms of trying to come up with a forecast, a couple of times that I tried, I didn't do very well. I will say this, as far as snowfall, the cold and the snow for coastal areas can be kind of a double-edged sword, and they don't necessarily have to go together. It's just important for it to be cold when we've got storms around. As far as production of snow is concerned, that has been particularly true in the it's true every winter to some extent, but it was particularly true in the winter of 16-17, where it was very warm for the month for the winter season, and yet we managed to have above normal snowfall over a vast majority of the area because, well, it just happened to get cold every time it snowed, and then it would warm up in between. So we've seen winters like that along the way. And of course, you could have it just the opposite, where you're so deep into the cold air that the storms are way too far south, and there's the jet from Canada is so strong that you don't really have any kind of amplitude, but you sort of have this broad bowl trough that pours in cold air, and everything that all the systems that are in there wind up being relatively weak. So all I can tell you is what I'm seeing right now. We are looking at, rather cool conditions, cooler than normal conditions in Canada, which has been the case all month. And it does look like things, at least at this moment, where we're going into a fall that's going to be different from the prior autumns. Another clue I would look for, by the way, is the shutting down of the hurricane season. If it shuts down early, there's some evidence to suggest that it's a signal that winter's going to start early in the eastern part of the United States. We'll see. Johnny Quest, I think that's, they do call it the Mordecai El Nino. I have to do some research to find out why they call it that. I don't know. Do I place much reliance on analogs, Steve Addy? Well, one of the things about analogs is that if you look hard enough, you could find an analog to match whatever argument you're making. I think they're fun to look at. I think they're slightly useful, but they're never really exactly the same. I think if you rely solely on analogs for storms, in terms of trying to come up with a practical forecast for a local area, you're bound to fail. So, but they are interesting to look at, and I think they have some value. But from the standpoint of a practical forecast value, when you're in that short range time frame and you gotta get a forecast out and you gotta be specific, I'm not going to say, well, you know what, in 1958 it kind of matches up with this storm, so this is what happened then, and that's what I'm going to do. That you can't do, because then you're doomed for disaster if that's the case. Chad Crawford saw pouring rain and 100% socked-in sky. It was purple, pink, very weird, with a 100-foot ceiling back on the 24th, and this was in Georgia. Now I wonder, I wonder what the purple pink stuff came from, but you get we've had a couple of instances with weird color skies under certain conditions up here as well. Would it be possible to have Judah Cohen on as a guest? Oh, if only. That's kind of on my list of things to do, Anthony. Thanks for reminding me. Send email to Judah Cohen and ask him to come on as a guest to explain all this Siberian snow cover stuff. Yeah, I'm going to try. All right, I'm definitely going to try. Let's see. Those guys, everyone else seeing on the 24th, said that it's definitely not normal. I'll do a little checking to see what that's all about. Ben McGinnis, I'm sorry. Thanks for reminding me about doing. I will, after we're done with this. I'm going to go look at the Ottawa tornado stuff. 500,000 people still without power. Wow, that's insane. Okay, Chad. Yeah, just give me the link to your channel. Well, I can check it off of here. I can get to your channel from here, and I'll take a look. Roy Wilson, October low latitude has attitude, and you're talking about Hazel back in 1954. That was an early October hurricane for the Carolinas, and it was a Category 3. I think it was a 4 on approach, and a strong 3 on landfall, and it brought some strong winds up and down the East Coast. Even though it went far inland and west of the Appalachians, New York City's record for their strongest wind, I believe it's 113 miles an hour, still stands from Hurricane Hazel. But they got very little rain out of it. It was a good solid 6 to 10 hours of really strong winds, and that was from a storm that went up and west of the Appalachians, where normally when that happens, there's not too much that happens to the east of the Appalachians, and you get some wind, but not a whole lot of rain, and most of the rain is near or just north and west of the center as it becomes this sort of extratropical, post-tropical monster as it moves northward. So major hurricanes are not unusual late in the season. They can happen in October. There are not a whole lot of them on there on record, but it certainly they could very well happen. And we've got the 15th anniversary of Hurricane Juan coming up on the 28th. Yeah, there's been a whole lot. The Matthew anniversary is coming up too. Maria is coming. I believe Maria is coming up also. Do I believe the remnants of Kirk will bring heavy rains to Trinidad because we are on a yellow level alert? Well, the tropical wave may very well do that, Nikolai Gomez. Yeah, I don't expect it to really. I mean, it might flare up a little bit. It could possibly redevelop into a weak tropical storm, but there's going to be strong wind shear just east of the islands that should take it apart. So you might get some showers and some gusty winds with that, but I'm not really overly concerned about you getting much more than anything else from the remnants of Kirk. Ben McInnes, Juan hit Nova Scotia as a Cat 2 in late September, so I never rule anything out. I've always keep a very open mind when it comes to weather stuff, because strange things have happened sometimes under certain situations. All right, folks, let's call it a night at this point. Thanks very much for being here, and thank you, Joe, for hitting Super Chat. Again, congratulations on your wedding, which is Thursday, and we're going to have a nice day for you. At least no rain, and maybe a little bit of sun. We'll see. I was too young for Donna, Travachino. I was born in 1959, so I was only 1 year old. My mother remembers it, but I do not. My first recollection of a tropical system, I think probably have to go into the 70s, because that's when, my brain made the connection with weather. So it would be Hurricane Belle. Although I do remember some of the other storms that brought remnants up along the way before that. All right, let me just remind you again, please, if you're interested, please check out my platform on Patreon. It's a great way to support what I'm doing between the channel and the websites and everything else. And if weather is your thing and you want to be in an absolute troll-free, harp-free, or as AARP free, harp-free, and or flat earther free environment where you don't have to deal with nonsense, by all means, please consider it. Also, I'm going to put up the my link to Amazon. If you shop on Amazon, this is a really easy way to help support my channel, because it doesn't really cost you anything. But if you're going to shop on Amazon and you use this link, just use the search in there and you get your stuff. Amazon will throw me back some coin out of their pocket, and it helps me get a couple of cigars every once in a while. Good night to J.S. Sweetie. Always good to see you. Patricia Jackson, good night to you. Steve Adley, good to see you here. All of you that join me on my channel on a regular basis, I really, really appreciate it greatly. I'm having a great time. The channel is growing rather quickly, which is nice, and I want it to keep on growing. So it wouldn't happen if it wasn't for you guys there. So thank you very much for being here. Tomorrow, by the way, 9:15 for those of you who are on Facebook, the Joe Rayo, Joe Chaffee Show, the Joe and Joe Weather Show. That's 9:15 on my Facebook page, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. And tomorrow, Patreon members, you'll get your live stream tomorrow morning, hopefully at 9 or 9:30. Got to drop my car off for an oil change, so hopefully I'll be back in time. And we'll be back to our normal YouTube live stream tomorrow night. It'll either be at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock Eastern time. The 7 o'clock hour has been working better for me lately, so I might have to just keep it at 7 o'clock for a bit. But just watch for the schedule. I'll schedule it up earlier in the day in terms of the time, and this way you'll know and you can plan it to be here. Thank you so much again. Have a great evening and a safe Monday night.